Hello and welcome to Illuminations with Tina and Fee, for you who desires a life of joy. I'm Tina.
I'm Fee.
Hello, Fee.
Hi, Tina.
It's a while since we've seen each other.
It is.
And again, this is such an exciting subject we're going to tackle now. It's a new month, a new subject. And I think we're following on quite nicely from attachment, because attachment very often, not always, very often is kind of developed in childhood. And now we're moving into the area of inner child, which again is I'm gonna use the word huge subject. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, it is. It certainly is.
But in usual,
is that your inner child asking?
That is my inner child asking, because I want to belong and I want to connect and be liked.
And my parent says yes, of course, in a loving, nurturing way.
Wonderful. Now, people might be thinking, what on earth are you going on about?
Yeah.
So,
pamphlet.
Should we just dive into explaining what we're talking about, really?
Yeah. So we've talked about how in attachment, you're right, it's beautifully led on, that by the time we're 7, we have our life scripts kind of put together. We will always tip in and out of this, you and I, whatever we tend to explore, because that's kind of the nub of it all. So by 7, we have got our beliefs, we've worked out our attachment. These things are not static, but they're kind of there. And at the age of 7, our prefrontal cortex, our cerebral reasoning, logic isn't formed until we're much later, about 15-ish. That at that point, we can't make sense of it. So a lot of it, because we're kind of quite egocentric at that age, we do think a lot of it is us. So the inner child is, I find it a beautiful way to start to explore with myself and with my clients where healing can start to be. Because if you can imagine, by the time you're 7, if you've got beliefs that are not particularly healthy, you can start to explore those. If you've got attachments like we've talked about, you can start to explore how we become more secure. But actually, it's the scars is a word I would use. It might be a little bit dramatic, but the scars that we hold from childhood, they're actually the ones that lead to our most subconscious, unconscious behaviours, and can often influence dramatically relationships, but also how we I don't like the language, but addictions and adaptions, how we utilize a whole range of experiences to fill the cracks from childhood. So that's really what the inner child is about. It's about the cracks, in a way, that we develop from childhood that we try and fill as we go on. So in transaction analysis, because of course that's where I have been doing quite a lot of studying, the idea is that from Byrne is that we have inside us, we have our parent and we have our adult and we have our child, and at different points in our existence we'll be in those different states, and usually child state is triggered. It's actually triggered, and I know we're going to do a season on transaction analysis, so I won't go too deep in, but the trigger takes us back into the childhood script, and the childhood script might be, if you've grown up in a home where there was violence, either emotional or physical, there'll be scripts running around that, around safety, around love, what love means. And the child can be, under transaction analysis, we have 2 elements of the child. We have the adapted child, which is the child that will be the survival part of us. How do I need to be here now so that I'm loved and safe? And, safety is the first one, of course, but in our heads, not real, but obviously in our heads. And the adaptive child is the child that, this because you've talked about it with me so much, like the good girl kind of model comes out of that. My be perfect, you know, we've looked at perfectionism, comes out of that, because that's my script that I go back into. So if I'm really the perfect coach, then, you know, you'll love me, you know. So it's watching any triggers that take me back into the script of wanting to be perfect. The other part of the child in transaction analysis, that the two significant divisors are, one is the adaptive child and one is the free child or the creative child. And that's the child that plays, that, you know, creates, that, you know, kind of is more free flow in thinking. It hasn't got the scarcity or the fear that comes along with the adaptive child to conform. And someone was telling me actually that in businesses, they're now getting a lot of companies, when they work with particularly managers, they're getting them out toys to get them into free child, because that's where our most creative thoughts will come from. So that's under transactional analysis, the child. And obviously, you know, if your adaptive child is kicking off all the time, then you will not be in a place of, you know, joy. It often, our adaptive child is about adapting quickly, and it's not about being in often joy. Our free child is definitely our joy. And then we have parent, and then we have adult, which we'll look at another time, but they're our child as far as transaction analysis.
Because I'm thinking about the adaptive child, that it so much comes out of fear. You know, I'm a people pleaser. You know, I want, you know, that's my way of kind of fitting in and being loved. And, you know, and it doesn't, you know, of course there is an element of joy of me wanting to, for example, in my coaching role, help people, but it's not about pleasing in that way. But that comes out of fear. If I don't please, I will not be loved and accepted. I will be rejected.
Yeah.
And therein comes that it's not a joyful existence, coming from that place all the time.
Yeah. And I found something really interesting, because there's obviously quite a lot of writing about narcissism at the moment. And thank you to you, because of getting to know Terry Cole and getting to know John Bradshaw's work, which I know you'll probably expand on because I've just tipped into it. But I thought this bit was really, really interesting. And it talks about narcissism. And I think it just starts to explain, even if we get narcissism a bit understood, people will get the nub of how being, you know, the childhood scars can play up. So he says, you're right if I read this just for a little bit, because he explains it much better than I ever could. So every child needs to be loved unconditionally, at least in the beginning, without the mirroring eyes of a non-judgmental parent or caretaker. Without the mirroring eyes of a non-judgmental parent or caretaker, a child has no idea of knowing who he or she is. Every one of us was a we before we became an I. We needed a mirroring face to reflect all the parts of ourselves. We needed to know that we mattered, that we were taken seriously, and that every part of us was lovable and acceptable. We also needed to know that our caretaker's love could be depended on. And these were our healthy narcissistic needs. And if we did not get them met, our sense of I am was damaged. The narcissistically deprived inner child contaminates the adult with an insatiable craving for love, attention, and affection. And the narcissistically deprived adult child cannot get his or her needs filled, because they are actually a child's need. And children need their parents all the time. I just thought that was enlightening. So that explains how narcissism can be acted out, you know, in adults. And I know there's quite a lot of talking and writing about that at the moment. It explains how it comes from that healthy narcissistic needs being deprived as a child, not mirrored back. You know, I love you for your foibles, you know, not despite them. That actually those then get taken through into adulthood, and the narcissistic child needs then really kick off. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
And I think that one of the important things to remember about narcissists is not that they're happy people, you know.
Absolutely.
Nobody hates themselves as much as they do, or nobody else. Underneath the surface when you start digging, because it is a real childhood wound there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I thought that was really helpful, just to explain even where that phenomena kind of comes from.
Yeah.
And so why do we look at this? Well, I kind of see people as a whole, and myself included. So I kind of think in the past, where the cracks have been, I've tried to fill them with people, with numbing out activities. And actually, the more I become whole by healing the cracks myself, the more anybody coming into my life is just the value added, Terry Cole's the icing on the cake. But also my use of even TV, of alcohol, is changing because it's not filling the hole. And does that resonate? Does that make sense to you, Tina?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course it makes sense. What I'd like to kind of put in there before we move on is that a childhood trauma doesn't have to be severe for us to have these inner child patterns. We all have them, even those people who had beautiful, wonderful childhoods, because of the brain hasn't been completely developed to make total sense. And because of this, like you said, we're quite selfish when we're children. We make a meaning out of it that as adults we would never make out of an event that happens to us. But because we're children, we think that it's about us and we make it mean something, and that's planted somewhere deep within us, and we're acting out from that childhood interpretation of an event, however trivial it might seem to an adult now.
Yeah.
So I really want to kind of bring that up, that this is not just people who have severe problems.
I agree. I talk about trauma with a small t, and Doreen Virtue, she is a great writer around this. She wrote a book called Don't Let Anyone Dull Your Sparkle, and that's what it's about. It's these small traumas, then they don't have to be, you're right, they're not significant events. They're small traumas where, because of ego self, and lack of being able to reason, we kind of go, this is my fault, this is about me. And that's where then we put the belief in, which we've of course explained in the beliefs. So go and check the belief season out, people, because that explains a lot. Once we get that belief, we then filter and do crazy behavior quite seriously as adults, crazy behavior to reconform those beliefs that come from the wounds. That's a lovely word, the wounds of childhood.
I think for ultimately for personally for me, and I think with clients as well, once you start understanding these wounds that have happened, you can then heal them. You can then do something about it. Closing your eyes to that something might have happened that you're closing your eyes to, and pretending, but because it governs your life so much, you go into these patterns of behavior, you self-sabotage. So once you've understood them and you can heal them, it leads to total freedom. I mean, freedom is a big word for me, and it's like freedom in life to kind of do the things that you want to do without being held back by yourself, and your old patterns. And also we like habits, we like familiarity, so whatever is familiar to us, we seek it out. And sometimes that which is familiar isn't good for us, but it's safe because, well, this is what I know. And again, it's cutting those cords to the past, kind of going, yes, this is familiar, but actually it's making me feel really miserable and leading to terrible behaviors towards myself and others. So now I will cut the cord. I will see the child within me. I will heal it. I will hear the child. What does it need from the adult me? How can we heal together and move forward?
And if you think about it and link it into the neuroscience, we have 70 to 90,000 thoughts a day, and 80% are the same thoughts as yesterday. So, Joe Dispenza, who I just saw recently, as really emphasizes that, and how if we wake up today, probably the thoughts we start the day with are the same thoughts we start the day with yesterday. So if you think about it just from a neuroscience point of view, that actually, you know, if we have to go back and do this healing, otherwise we just end up in the same place. And sometimes we can work up at a cerebral level, you know, and we can change the thoughts. But what I'm finding is that if that continuously comes round, it's about going deeper. And in transactional analysis, they talk about looking for the splinter, you know, finding what is the splinter. You know, it's a story around a man who had a splinter in his foot, didn't do anything about it, went to the doctors gave him antibiotics, he reacted to the antibiotics and his leg ballooned up, and so his leg got worse, and he went back to the surgeon, and the surgeon said, we think we're going to have to take your leg off from the knee, and it goes on and on like this, and it's just take the splinter out, you know. So healing the inner child and being aware of the inner child is part of the splinter removing. Well, no, that could be a belief. I was going to say not always easy. I mean, I actually, you know, I met little Fee through an NLP activity that I do about belief change, and someone was doing it with me and I met her there. In fact, you also did it with me. You've done it twice and I met her with you. And so I really see little Fee, you know, it looks like I smile because she's actually quite funny. She's quite a sweet little thing. And so I connect with that. You know, and the other time I really met the inner child work was when I went on the retreat with David James Lees, and he comes from a Taoist point of view that we're born divine, and it's just the lies that we build up. And he does a lot of inner child healing, similar to Thich Nhat Hanh's work, you know, around affirmation and basically soothing work, you know. And so that was the other time I really came across the notion of inner child in that way, as in this is part of me, you know, and she's there. And the thing about our inner child, isn't it, is that if we ignore it, if you've got a toddler in the room or a child, you know, who just wants your attention, and they're going, mum, you know, in order to get your attention, if they're not getting it, they'll just start screaming louder and louder. And that's what happens with the inner child. It just gets louder and louder and louder. You know.
I think that describes it beautifully. That is exactly what happens, you know, and it will get your attention eventually. You know, there is no way around it. You know, so you might as well listen. You know, what is it? What do you want? What do you need? You know, okay, this, you know, this is bringing up your fears, blah blah blah. Okay, I'll soothe you. You know.
And actually, this is interesting because I was listening to Sounds True. They had this amazing summit, which was, you probably know, self-acceptance. And there's a guy in there called Patrick Palmer that just caught my eye because I'm very interested in the shadow side at the moment. And he talked about coming into the shadow, whatever depressive thoughts. But if you think about it, those thoughts could be your inner child, you know, kind of wanting stuff. So actually coming in and being with the child, it's like being empathetic and sitting like Brené Brown in the bottom of the hole with the, you know, with the person and going, you know what, honey, I know this is really difficult. You know, the empathy with your inner child. Because so many people I work with, oh my goodness, the berating and the self-berating goes on.
I know.
And I say, you know, what would you say to me if I was there? And they're like, oh, I'd be kind, and I'd ask you, could I hug you? And I'm like, But it's you know, that's the inner child that doesn't allow you to be kind to yourself. That's wounds from inner childhood. From the inner child from childhood. You know, these are all the indicators. If you've got a strong voice that continuously says you're stupid, why'd you do that, you're an idiot, you're worse, you know, all that's all scars and wounds from inner child.
Yeah. And hey, we all got those voices, more or less, you know. We're somewhere on the scale, you know. I haven't met a single person who hasn't, even though they might have not gone, I don't have a voice, but then they kind of go, oh, that's the feeling that I have, or whatever it is. So I just want to assure anyone watching that you're not the only one.
Oh no. You know. I think probably if they watch most of the Illuminations, they'd realise we still have our inner voices. And I know now the difference is now I know when I know quite a bit of the challenges of my inner child. I know when she's probably going to kick off a bit. I probably know now, so I can get in there quicker. So the carousel is going but I'm just not stepping on it so quick, you know. And that's through a lot of reading, strategies, learning, working with you. You know, it's not going, do you know what? I'm going to be a slave to this. You know, I'm going to let this lead me. It's like, do you know what? I have a right to have a life of joy. I really have a right to it, and so therefore I'm going to sort this. Which might mean I'm going to sort this little fee. It doesn't have to be so assertively kind of strong. It can be soft as well.
Of course.
You know.
And it's also about little fee deserving a life of joy.
Absolutely.
You know, because it's
a joy together.
Yeah, exactly. Joy together. That's a good way to end it because we're out of time.
Excellent.
I haven't at all thought about a question as usual. So do you have a question that you think would be appropriate here?
I would just ask people to maybe sit and just come into a quiet place and think about if they can imagine themselves when they were a child, and think of times, happy times, if they, you know, can remember times like that when they were a child. So consider just to get to know their, you know, get a photograph and look at yourself as a child. Just get to know what your inner child looks like. That might be a start.
Okay, brilliant. So for the viewers, thank you for joining us today. If you liked this episode, let us know. Share it around and make any comments. You know, you might have some questions, so let us know and we'll answer those. Until next time, Fee, thank you.
Thank you.
And
bye now.
Bye to everyone. Bye.